Contrast Security enables organizations to secure their applications from development to production. By embedding security sensors within software, Contrast automatically and continuously detects vulnerabilities in both custom and open source code while developers write code, providing them with context-specific how-to-fix guidance for easy and fast remediation. At the same time, by identifying only true vulnerabilities that pose risk and eliminating those that do not, Contrast empowers developers and security teams to prioritize and focus on only those vulnerabilities that matter. Learn how Contrast can help you secure your applications from development through production at securityweekly.com/contrast.
You hear that, Mr. Anderson? That is the sound of Application Security Weekly. It is the sound of your host, Mike Shima, being joined by John Kinsella. Never send a human to do a machine's job. Sorry, but this human needs to read some announcements. Do you have a specific guest or topic that you want us to cover on one of the shows? Submit your suggestions for guests by visiting securityweekly.com/guests and completing the form. We review suggestions monthly and we'll reach out to you once reviewed. And the new year's coming, 2022. Join us January 20th to learn how to build your own security lab at home. Don't forget to check out our library of on-demand webcasts and other technical training at securityweekly.com/on-demand. Mr. Kinsella, this brings us to the last news segment of 2021. It could be all about Log4j, which we'll have to get into, but I think there's a couple other things beyond Log4j going on. One of the things, though, that I'll point out to, yes, good indeed. There's some interesting stuff. I think we can still talk about Log4j. We'll give a shout out to one of our co-hosts, Adrian Sanabria, who's put together a bit of a matrix, if you will, and I posted it into our ASW Discord about what version are you currently on and what version should you upgrade to. And one of the reasons I was highlighting that is that a situation like Log4j is really tough on DevOps teams because a patch comes out, they have to scramble. Security team tells them this is bad, got to go patching. So they scramble, they fix it. Then they get another message that says, well, there's still a problem with that patch. We need to patch the patch, or there's something else that we need to do. So we've gone from 2.15 to 2.16 to 2.17 for various reasons. Now, I think on the one hand, most of the vulns that are being addressed in 2.16 and 17 are non-default configurations or people who are actually using the lookups feature. So fingers crossed, if you're just on 2.15 and you've disabled lookups, you might still at least be in a mitigating area. But things change so much. I want to be careful what I say because I might be slightly off by the time we finish this segment.
Yeah, I don't know. I played with that some of the code last week, and at least to me, and I understand different orgs are going to have different use cases, but for me, just pulling out that lookup library from the lookup class, actually the JNDI class from your Log4j jar, just kneecap it. I mean that.
Yes.
That to me seemed like a quite nice way to do it. I still have large, loud questions around why do we have such lookup functionality. But yeah, I mean, I think to talk about this for a few seconds, I think what's really interesting about this for me is if you think about, we talk about input sanitization and escaping and all these different types of ways that we usually deal with a lot of the OWASP top 10. Most of us, when we're logging, you're trying to do something quickly and efficiently and put enough detail in there that if by some very small chance we actually go back and look at those logs after prod to track down an issue, we can see what's going on. And now you're telling me that either I have to somehow encode that or minimize the size or do something with that, which is going to, increasing compute for something which is just a fallback in a way. It's a fairly tough thing to handle or to solve. So I think that's why it's getting attention from folks. You can't just patch it. And again, I've been making a lot of fun of this for the last week or so, which is probably why I'm now explaining myself. But and for folks that are listening, go check out our Discord. We actually have there's a memes channel on there where we've been throwing in some memes about Log4j. But yeah, and I think I'm in a Go mind right now. So I'm with Go, I'm using something from Uber called a package called Zap, where I'm able to actually put in, for each argument that I'm putting into the log, I'm specifying this is JSON, this is a string, this is an integer. So there's a lot less chance of hanky-panky going on. But still, if I put in a string or there's actually a zap.any, any of the stuff in theory could come and bite me in the butt in the next 2 or 3 years on my Go world, where I think I'm not worrying about Java. And I think that's interesting. What do we really expect developers to start sanitizing input going to a log? I mean, I know we've done this in the past for, either passwords or credit card numbers or sensitive information like that, which is already, usually from my experience, that requires you end up with a bit of teeth gnashing from a developer when you ask them to do that. Mm-hmm. But now we're going to say do that for all your logging. I don't know. It's a bit of a hill to climb. It's unfortunate.
It is, and that triggers two thoughts in my mind. One is just a call back to our interview segment with Dan, where he was pointing out the idea of fuzzing, and not everyone is using fuzzing. I'm not going to say correctly, not completely or getting full coverage of it. And you brought up even the example that we talked about last week with libnss and Mozilla, and they were using fuzzing, but they weren't fuzzing. They didn't have their fuzzing enabled to identify all of the attack surface, or they had it limited to I think it was a 10,000 character buffer limit, when it was a pretty simple vuln to exploit if you go over the 16K buffer limit. So it's just interesting that we have tools to find these types of problems, but we still, they're still not perfect, and there's a lot of complexity to using them correctly. So that was one path my brain was going down. And you're talking also about input validation. I go back and forth on whether even just to say input validation at all. For example, in the classic case of cross-site scripting, I don't see that as an input validation problem, or even SQL injection. I see that as an output encoding, or how are you mixing your data and code? In this Log4j, that's kind of similar, that you're having this macro expansion substitution with JNDI and lookups, which quite honestly can be extremely surprising for developers when they're not even using this feature, but it's turned on by default. And so that's what's kind of crazy there. So I think, if I would have broadened this conversation into one of the challenges that security teams have, it's how do we communicate effectively? What are the smart things to do? What are the good things to do? Because as we're speaking in Discord, Adrian is also pointing out that there's other problems that came up, Meltdown and Spectre, and lots of organizations were like, oh, well, should we patch this? How do we patch this? And a lot of them just didn't react to it because, quite honestly, they have other more fundamental or simpler things to deal with. Like if you haven't fixed your software composition analysis, your graph dependency graph, and you haven't have a good solution to cross-site scripting, Spectre and Meltdown are probably a little bit more advanced that you need to be dealing with now. But that was my end of the year ranty, not so ranty soapbox to get on. So I'm not sure. I'm not sure where I'm going with that now. I'm just going to turn it back over to you, Mr. Kinsella.
Well, hot potato catch. I think, let's see there. I dropped my thoughts. I thought we were going to move on. You were talking about, yeah, let's just keep going. How about segueing from that? You start talking about Spectre and go move towards hardware. It's easy for me to say.
Yes. Yeah, so I got one of the recurring a callback, a gimmick on the show is me joking about reading material and homework for you, John. I think I found one that's going to end the year on a good long note for you. This is research from NCC Group about FPGAs, and it's a great overview of just what FPGAs are in general, a great list of some wonderfully named vulnerabilities that have come out in the past year or so. Starbleed and Thangry Cat. So bonus points for the excellent naming scheme. But I'm not sure how much you've had a chance to read through it so far. But I know hardware is an area of interest for you. So walk us through some areas that we should be paying attention to in this particular article.
Yeah, this is a fun one. I think this is a really great overview for, for people who might not be, an FPGA is sort of it's a really foreign thing to a lot of people. Like a lot of people, they might be having a hard time just wrapping their head around what a microprocessor is, or an Arduino, or even a Raspberry Pi. Some of our small Lego blocks we have today. And this paper does a really great job of sort of talking through the different industries which are using FPGAs, why they're using them, why they're becoming more and more popular. Even a shout out to both Ali Cloud and AWS, where you can rent FPGAs. Don't get your hopes up because they're about $125 at Amazon, which comes out to about $800 a month. So you better have a good use. But you can get into these at a lower price point. They're still not cheap, man. I mean, you're looking at orders of magnitude probably over the cost of a Node MC or some sort of little microcontroller. But so they start off by talking through who's using these, why are they using them, and as you said, they start talking through some of the vulnerabilities and attacks we've had in the past on these things, plus where this might be going as an industry. You know, they make a tie-in, for example, on with the cloud stuff, saying, hey, right now there's single tenancy on the use of an FPGA in a cloud. But they're obviously putting, say, 4 or 8 of these bad boys into a server, and then there's multi-tenancy on the server, and they suspect in the future there might be multi-tenancy on the FPGA. I don't see that happening, but anything's possible. But so it's a long paper, a good paper, very well, easy to read and well written, that sort of walks you through what's going on and some links off to some other things. So yeah, as I was teasing off air, you took up about an hour of my day because you send me something like this and go start reading it. It's I think that the big takeaway is it's an interesting space. It's not a cheap space to play in. Like they make a call out to the Chip Whisperer, which I now have one of, and you can get a target board for the Chip Whisperer, so you can actually work on attacks voltage attacks and exfiltration attacks off an FPGA target board. The target board itself, without the Chip Whisperer, is about $1,000. So this is. Well, it's an interesting space. It's not, it requires some deep pockets to really get into it. But if you're working with FPGAs in the first place, it should probably be on your mind. So, definitely a little light reading for your eggnog.
Oh, and I do enjoy some eggnog, that's for sure. There's also, I didn't link to it, but the write-up does also reference the RISC-V project, which is a open source hardware instruction set architecture. To be a little bit pedantic, I apologize. But it's pretty neat because with RISC-V, there's a lot of interesting ways of, not only do we have the hardware, but we have to do something with this hardware. So what are the algorithms we can create? And one of the things, or some of the things that stand out to me, are these use cases for RISC-V or for potentially FPGAs in terms of secure boot processes and encryption and better protecting keys. And there's a give and take here because some of the vulnerabilities they're also highlighting are flaws that have been found in authenticity, confidentiality, that breaking the encryption schemes or breaking the secure boot process. So sounds like there's also perhaps some profitable areas for DARPA research as well as a callback to our prior segment with Dan. You were mentioning cloud. Oh, go ahead.
Yeah, I was mentioning cloud, but really quick on this. So for folks who want to get their hands dirty, I've backed a crowd supply. So crowd supply is like a Kickstarter for hardware projects. I've backed something out there called Cryptor FPGA, just threw a link into Discord, where there's some guys out there that are working on making a hardware security module in an FPGA. So it gives you a chance to get the FPGA and play with that. It's in a SOC, sys-mounted chip, so it's all in one unit. A little harder to hack, but it gives people, if they want to, those who are interested in going into that type of way. But tell me more about your question about cloud.
Cloud. So a little bit of deja vu because there was an outage in US East 1 that I foreshadowed we were going to talk about this. I think both on Monday and then again either on Tuesday or Wednesday of the same week. And there in the show notes we linked to the postmortem of it. Now, I didn't read through in detail. I don't remember reading through in detail to figure out what the underlying cause was. But there was a lot of DNS errors that propagated throughout that made things difficult for the region to come back up. But I wanted to highlight this, not so much the sense of, look on, US East 1, it's always DNS or it's always that in Amazon region, but more about the A in the CIA. So the idea of availability and how often, dear AppSec practitioners, are you pulling that into your threat models? Because there are aspects of just resiliency of the product that you're working with. Is it deployed on multi-regions, multiple zones so that it actually can have high availability? But if you're also doing things like responding to Log4j, or if you have communications during an incident, if those communications are running on something like a US East 1 that goes down, suddenly a lot of your secondary aspects of your product security, your incident response might be unavailable. So it's always interesting as well to look inward for the AppSec team or your security team to figure out what type of redundancy, what type of resiliency do you have in your own processes, just as you do the same types of discussions with the product teams you're working with. So that was where I thought I could try to pull this into a fun way of making it applicable to AppSec. So, John, was I convincing? Don't worry about hurting my feelings.
No, I think that A on the CIA triad is really important. I've been spending a lot of time this week thinking about it from a product owner, product developer, right? In a small startup. I really don't want to spend engineering time right now on making my product. There's two ways I can go with this. I can either go, I definitely should be in multiple availability zones or regions, or maybe I go hybrid and go multi-cloud, right? So the scary thing on this one for me on Monday, while it wasn't as visible to the general public as there was 2 on Wednesday, by the way, but it wasn't as visible as the Wednesday issues. Mm-hmm. The issue on Monday resulted in people not being able to get into their administrative console in some cases. So while my servers might be up, I can't get more of them, or I can't get them up. So that to me is almost worse, right? And that's what makes me think, okay, do I go multi-cloud? And then you start thinking, okay, what's the cheapest way to do that? How can I do this effectively? In any type of modern startup, we're all about, Amazon or any of these companies are making great tools which we want to consume so we can quickly go back to building our product. If I don't have to do an identity system, if I don't have to, manage my own databases, thank God I'm not doing anything with Kubernetes, but if I had to do anything with Kubernetes, I'd rather have them do it. So all these type of things, right? That's the reason we go into these clouds. We want to use those things. But each one you use, you're a little bit more and more, you're hugging that large entity a little bit closer. So when they have any type of bump in the night, it makes it harder for you to think about, should I go to another cloud? Should I go to multiple clouds? How do I do this? So that's sort of where it's coming from me. I think with that said, it's super important, right? You've basically been DOSed, but you weren't DOSed by a malicious user. You're DOSed by your own provider, and that's at the end of the day. DOS hasn't been a huge thing on the radar in 2021, I don't think. But still, it's super important, right? It's not as big of a deal as it was like a few years ago, and I was like, oh my God, DOS attacks. But still, if you're down, you're down, and that turns into revenue, or it could be worse depending on when that outage happens. If you're doing a big pitch, or if you're trying to get a new customer, or you've got a sale going on, or whatever have you, and suddenly you're not available, it's a really bad look. So it's an important thing to really think about and figure out, how do we deal with this.
Absolutely. And I think on the DOS front, you're right to note that we really haven't, at least on this show, touched on many DOS incidents because it's hard to find something interesting to talk about them with. But I think there was at least one, or there was a new top leveled, what am I trying to say? Not packets per second, but the biggest DOS ever was identified this year. So there were some of those instances. But to your point, especially with a threat modeling hat on, I tend to diminish talking about motivations or who the attacker is, and more about the consequences. Meaning, you rightly pointed out, okay, we have an outage. Now, there may be some important aspects of it from a threat intel perspective or some forensics perspective about who's doing this. Was it a malicious insider? Was it just a DNS? Was it a misconfiguration? Was it just a massive DOS against us? But we're still out. And so how have we designed our application or our product to be resilient against this? And that is the important part that I have in the conversations with product teams, as opposed to trying to get into the details. Well, John was having a bad day and he just decided to turn the DOS dial up to 11 on something, because that's not really as useful, and you don't create mitigations against necessarily the actors unless you are a large government entity that can drop sanctions on somebody or deploy law enforcement. So Thank you for highlighting that point. That got my brain thinking about a different aspect I didn't anticipate about this area with DOS.
And it comes back a little bit to sort of like what Dan was talking about in the last half hour, which is, combine some of his thoughts on what you were just saying. It's like, okay, well, my box, which I bought, it can handle a DOS attack up to 37 gigabits, or let's talk in packets. 10 million packets per second. Usually we think about DOS from a PPS point of view, not so much bandwidth.
Right.
So, okay, now we've got a bigger DOS. Shoot, I need to go get a bigger box that goes up to, 20 million packets per second. That's probably not the right way to be thinking about this. And that's sort of, what do you do? And are in this situation, it's like, okay, am I okay with Amazon being down for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, half hour? I'm not writing software that's, there's a story we didn't put in the notes today, but there's another vulnerability out there, and let's just say it's related to cardiac devices, which people use. So I'm not doing something life and death, right? I'm much more mundane than that, but still at the same time, downtime is downtime. So, okay, at what point do I care enough that I can go do the risk calculation and say, hey, I need to figure out a way to sync between two clouds. And then what's the easiest way to do it? And I'm talking about this very hypothetical and asking questions instead of actually giving people thoughts in my head. Mm-hmm. Really what I'm thinking about is to sort of put some meat in there is, do I go to a third-party database as a service who I'm paying them to do active replication between two different clouds? Because the rest of what I'm doing, right, is fairly stateless, either lambdas or something like that, even containers. But if I can have if I can have my stuff running on two different places and have someone else that I can hopefully trust to run the data back and forth between them, maybe that's an easy way out of this. But that's sort of where my head's been for last week and thinking about this stuff. And it's as you're rightly saying, whether you're a large or a smaller org, when we have topics on here, hopefully we're doing a pretty good job of not so much talking about, this is how you mitigate by installing this particular version of Log4j. It's take a step back and think about what are you doing with that and what's going on. And that's where I want people to really start thinking about this stuff.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, because you also, what you highlighted too, talking about should we outsource this essentially for our database management. We're talking about, transferring engineering, transferring risk for that matter, because one of the aspects too is, do we think that, Amazon, for example, is going to be able to respond much more quickly to Meltdown Inspector, since we mentioned those already, or is my own IT and security team going to be doing better? I'm willing to bet that Amazon has deeper pockets, and they're probably going to pay more attention to that multi-tenancy, fingers crossed, and that's a good transfer of risk. Log4j is another very great example that unfortunately has a bit of mixed success because it's so pervasive. You can find, Java has been a great enterprise language, and it's in tons of appliances, it's tons of surprising places, so you have these second-order dependencies. But with that said, we haven't talked about Oracle Cloud. Maybe this will be the third time we mentioned it this year, but hopefully, one hopes that Oracle is updating all of their cloud services, and everyone else using Log4j, all the, anything SaaS, is updating Log4j much more quickly and diligently than you might be able to with your own on-prem services. So again, just trying to find that optimistic side of everyone who's unfortunately been, scrambling and dodging those bullets, as you rightly pointed out, John. Trying to fix Log4j as we come into the holiday season.
And one real quick point on that before we move on. Remember, these large providers are frequently on pre-release lists, so they're finding out about these vulnerabilities coming out usually, hopefully, about a week before the rest of us. So, especially for these really hardcore, nasty ones, you don't want to be running your own. I see very little, and I'm obviously pretty pro cloud, but I see very little reason to be running your own data center in 2021, 2022.
Yes, I think we've already, you in particular, why are you running your own email system? Why are you running your own DNS? Let's throw data center onto that list as well. I think that will be the long naughty or nice list, perhaps, of are you running email or not? Going to segue now just to a couple more articles from this week as we sort of slowly change into a review of the past year. I threw in one article about a new hack DHS program that honestly, typically would be kind of a snoozer for me, and not typically the sort of article I pull on to the show. But John, I did want to throw it in there just because you've been talking and thinking recently, just in looking at payout values for bounties. And this one was just another single data point where DHS was coming out saying, here's $5,000. And so I just wanted to throw that out there, something that we're tracking, interested in, but I'm happy to move on because I'm not sure how exciting bug bounty is right now.
I thought it was funny when I saw this article, the dollar amount isn't what caught my eye. DHS is being very particular about, oh no, we only want you to attack these systems over here. And okay, that's the start. Guys, the other ones are still getting attacked. You're just not paying out bounties on them. So that gave me a giggle.
That is pretty good. So what is that? RFC 3514. We'll leave that as the Easter egg for people to look up what that is. And that gives us a segue into timeout risk. So we've actually, I think this might be the third article that we pulled out this year from Phil Venables, who is clearly been thinking about the large picture, clearly strategic-minded thinking, and that's why we like to highlight him. This is an updated list of risk megatrends, which sounds like a great, Megatron's cousin for all you Transformers fans out there. I highlighted this once again to pull in an application or product security angle, just pointing out that the API economy of the extended enterprise, meaning API security, is a big deal. Okay, not too much of a big surprise there, but also complexity management, number 8 on this list, is often this tension between complexity and security. And as a callback to another article that we did cover, it's not so much complexity itself that causes the difficulties here. It's the idea that we have a complex system, but we don't have secure defaults with it, or we don't have, it's not written in a way that shows paved roads, to use preferred cliche, or something else. So I think there's a lot of, as I'm saying this, I realize I forgot to pull out which episode we were talking that on, but there are ways to approach complexity to have good basic practices. We talked in the last segment about asset inventory, which still is one of those things, once again, easy to say, very difficult to do accurately. And that's right now with Log4j what a lot of people are struggling with. Where are all of the places that Log4j may show up? Because I know the code that I'm building, I know the code that might be going through my own CI/CD process, but what about all my SaaS vendors? What about all these appliances that I might be running in my now legacy data centers that I should be moving off of? Because John said so, and I agree. So that's where I'm going with that. Was there something in here that caught your eye, John, on this list?
It's a fun list. I think, and it's probably my state of mind after reading a few things over the weekend. Unfortunately, it's probably between number 7 talking about an age of rage, and then also 5 talking about sovereignty reigns again. I won't name names, but there's one open source group I'm part of. I'm part of several, so I can have a little bit of anonymity in here. But one of them, a conversation started recently, wondering if that organization should still be based in the U.S. or if it should start thinking about, and this isn't like actually something happening, so the media doesn't have to pick up on this. This is just a thought process. But should the organization think about maybe moving to a more neutral country than the United States? And I'm not trying to start any pro or anti. This is just what people are thinking. And you've got some countries out there in Asia where they're actually building their own CPUs because they don't trust American fabs. You've got some countries in Europe that sort of look at U.S. sideways due to some of our the actions we've taken on banking and things like that. And this isn't going to happen. It's a thought process, and it got put to bed pretty quickly. But people are thinking about that type of thing. So if you're where are you going to host your data? There's other startups out there which will make sure, it's actually really neat, but they will make sure you can tag your data with it belongs to a user in this country, and they'll make sure that it's stored in the appropriate location, so you don't have to worry as much about the geopolitical issues. As I'm just talking through this in a few seconds, you were talking about complexity, and talk about the complexity of those two things alone. And we haven't even really got into the digital side of it. So I think there's a lot of balls that need to be juggled. a good friend of mine is she's got both her American privacy certification as well as GDPR in Europe. And you get her starting talking about the privacy aspects going on here, and it's come back hours later. It's there's a lot of stuff going on. So the more simple we can make the programming itself, again, as we were talking last hour, we called back to that a bunch of times. But if you can make that code a little bit tinier and neater, and make it easier to prove that it's safe, then it's more time to work on some of these other issues.
Absolutely. I think that gives us a good setup that I wanted to also just kind of, we're ending 2021 with this as our final news segment. I did want to look back in a year in review, and some of the things that we did pull out touch on those geopolitical aspects you were alluding to there, John. One, for example, is the security and privacy analysis of TikTok that Citizen Lab did. And we, of course, we have a bias towards focusing on the technical issues around here, but we try to not forget that the trust and safety, as well as the privacy, as well as some of the geopolitical issues around this, because you cannot live within a vacuum of pure technical, this is a vulnerability or not a vulnerability. There's a lot of things. How does this affect users? And TikTok, of course, who owns it? Is it owned by an American company or Chinese company or other? That's just one example that I had that was concrete. For an American company, we covered WhatsApp and the NCC Group's review of that. And there's some very important privacy as well as policy issues around end-to-end encryption, and how do you inspect it to do something as simple as, let's say, minimize spam or minimize unwanted DMs, to the far end of the spectrum of how do we as an industry create an end-to-end encryption that can still also protect users against CSAM, a child sexual abuse material. So there is a lot of complexity, and maybe one of the goals we'll have for 2022 is bring some experts in to talk about this, because as you pointed out, your friend, let's have them come in and she can tell us, as someone who's certified, who works in this area, provide the expertise rather than what can often be one of the dangers of AppSec or InfoSec people who suddenly become overnight experts on a topic but don't necessarily understand the deep history behind it. And so that's one of the things I wanted to highlight. I'm going to switch then real quick. We also talked about some named vulns. So we had Log4j, of course, on top of everybody's mind. Alpaca, which was wonderfully named. Proxy Logon. And I think one of your favorites, Chaos DB, John. That goes back to your, as we're talking about moving database into the cloud. I know you might have some particular choices, but I don't think even Cosmos DB says don't use the cloud.
Yeah, you had to remind me about that beautiful thing, didn't you? Yeah, what I was going to say was, it's one of the hazards of listening to a show like Application Security Weekly. You have us yahoos trying to tell you about what you should be doing security-wise. Go listen to the expert on that. There was a thought there in what you were talking about. Going back really briefly on the the reason we bring up geopolitical and things like this is not so much us versus them, but for no matter where you are in the world, U.S. or Asian, or maybe you're down in Antarctica, working on a startup down there or something. Wherever you are, there's someone else who's got their eye on you, either for monetary reasons, for political reasons, geopolitical reasons, just because they're bored, whatever it is. And that's sort of part of the reason I bring these things up to think about, right? In particular, because those large nation states tend to throw a lot of money at this. Or have deep pockets, deep resources. So that's sort of why I'm mentioning these things also. It's not just purely for the privacy aspect of it. There were a lot of interesting names attacks this year. I was thinking over the last weekend or so, I am really hoping that, in 2022, we do get to see that white paper talking about why we have, how JavaScript has been secured in a sandbox in Excel as that comes out. Yeah, it's we've got all sorts of fun ones we can bring back and make people think about. But yeah, it's been an interesting year. It's been interesting to see how things have changed. We've talked a lot about SBOM. We've talked a lot about supply chain security. I think we talked about that at the beginning of the year, not really expecting at the end of the year that we'd be going, oh my God, we need to track down where this particular library is installed, and that would actually be the denouement of the year, so to speak. But hopefully we've put a few things to rest, and there'll be a few things we won't have to talk about in 2022.
Indeed. And to your point, too, we were just talking about government research. We were just talking about DARPA funding Dan and Trail of Bits work. So we're seeing, I think that just reinforces the point you were making there. And I can't let a reference to everyone down in Antarctica go by the way without sending a shout out to all the folks at Outpost 31. Stay safe, stay warm. I think we did end last December. We were talking about the vulnerability or the incident that rhymes with polar fins to, again, riff off things that are Arctic and Antarctic. This year, of course, we're ending on the supply chain once again with Log4j, which is possibly more impactful. It hits more, it's more relevant to many, many, many more organizations and enterprises. So who knows what 2022 will bring? But I guess in the spirit of what you're looking forward to, I'm quite curious to see more WebAssembly and see if, for example, WebAssembly is part of that sandboxing that is making JavaScript inside Excel a bit safer, or a bit less worrisome, or a bit less to use my own version of the Wilhelm scream. But so that's what I'll be looking forward to. But I think the other thing I just want to say as I start to wrap up my thoughts for the year is sending out a shout out and a call out for everyone on our Discord, or all of our listeners in general. Let us know what has been interesting to you. Let us know some other areas and types of topics that you'd love us to lean into and talk more about. I think we're definitely going to see a bit more hardware, because that's an area where John's eyes light up, and he's been playing quite a bit with. And so that's my thought. So I'm not sure if there's also something else that you have in mind for that, John.
Yeah, I think we're definitely working on bringing back one or two hosts in the new year to talk more about hardware hacking. It is. I'm happy to see I'm keeping that as a hobby, and it's something for me to look forward to. So yeah, that's sort of fun. The other thing I'd love to hear from our listeners is, what do they want us to never talk about again? We tend to go through our phases of things, but get rid of that John guy, and I'm sure I'm going to get some of that. But tell us not just what we're doing good, but what are we doing bad? We like that. We do appreciate all feedback in all forms. As long as it's not delivered to our houses. Sandboxing is on my list of things I'm really looking forward to seeing. I think all sorts of stuff about web. We talked a little bit about that. I've got a bunch of tabs open, just like stuff I haven't got a chance to read yet, which looks really exciting on that topic. I'd love to see more maturity. I'd love to see people thinking more about maturity of application security. So not so much as we were again talking in the last half hour of, hey, we need to touch online. Let's step back and figure out, okay, why was that there? Where else is it? Can we sort of snip that whole guy as a trend? I'd love to see more focused learning and intentional learning like that. So that's my hope for the new year.
No, great hope. And so, yeah, by all means, please send us constructive feedback of all kinds into Discord channel and let us know what you'd love to see, what you'd like to see perhaps less of, because there's a big something out there, big universe. That's the word I'm looking for within application security that we can cover on the show. And of course, we'll hopefully make sure we do it in a way that keeps me laughing and keeps John laughing as well. Because John, that's been great to have you throughout this year, as well as I think we're coming on 3 years now with Application Security Weekly. So just want to say thank you for joining me throughout this journey.
It's been a blast. We haven't got tired of each other yet. We have a fountain of information to talk through while we giggle, so I'm enjoying it. Good to have you here.
Indeed. Fountain of information. Thank you. That was much better metaphor than I was going for. Also, want to thank everyone who's been listening to us and been hanging out in the Discord channel as we do these live as well. Also, want to make sure to give a special shout out to the crew that makes this possible every single week. That is Johnny, Gus, Sam, and Renee. And with that, we'll see you next year on Johnny, I need an exit. And this is where he wasn't ready for the outro. But that's it. Matrix references all the way. Thanks again, everybody. And we'll go poke Johnny with a stick for our good fade out.